My name is Eleanor Brooks, and at 64 years old, I learned that losing your husband isn't always the greatest heartbreak. Sometimes the people he leaves behind hurt you even more. If you're listening to my story, tell me where you're watching from. I'd love to know how far this story has traveled. The last guest had barely left the funeral when silence settled over the house. It was the kind of silence that didn't bring peace. It echoed. Every room reminded me of Daniel. His reading glasses still rested on the kitchen counter. His favorite blue sweater hung behind the bedroom door. Even the coffee mug he'd used the morning before his heart attack was still sitting in the dishwasher, because I couldn't bring myself to wash it. 40 years. 40 years of marriage had ended in one terrible afternoon. I stood by the living room window, staring at the rain sliding down the glass, when I heard the front door open. No one knocked. They never did. It was Daniel's 2 children. Ryan walked in first, wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Behind him came his younger sister, Vanessa, carrying a leather portfolio under one arm. Neither of them asked how I was doing. Neither offered a hug. Vanessa simply looked around the house as though she were inspecting a property she'd already purchased. "I'm glad you're still here," Ryan said flatly. "We need to talk." I nodded slowly. I thought the funeral ended an hour ago. It did. And this couldn't wait until tomorrow? Ryan exchanged a quick glance with his sister. No. That single word told me everything. This wasn't about grief. This was business. I invited them into Daniel's study. The room smelled faintly of cedar wood and old books. Daniel had spent countless evenings there, planning investments, reading history, and writing in the leather journal he never allowed anyone else to touch. As I sat behind his desk, I didn't sleep that night. Not even for an hour. The key sat in my palm like it was burning through my skin. Small. Brass. Ordinary to anyone else, but to me it felt like Daniel was still speaking, just without a voice. For Eleanor. Those words kept repeating in my mind. At sunrise, I made my decision. I would not wait for Monday. I grabbed my coat, tucked the key into my pocket, and left the house before the world fully woke up. The air outside was cold enough to sting my lungs, but I welcomed it. Kept me from falling apart. Daniel's attorney, Harold Green, lived downtown in a building that looked older than most of its clients. When I arrived, his assistant looked surprised. "Mrs. Brooks, I wasn't expecting you." "Neither was I," I said quietly. "But I need to see Mr. Green." Within minutes, I was sitting across from him. Harold studied me carefully. He had known Daniel for 20 years, maybe more. If anyone understood my husband's mind, it was him. "You look like you haven't slept," he said. "I haven't." "I assume the children came?" I nodded. "And the estate reading happened?" Another nod. He sighed deeply and removed his glasses. I was afraid of this. Something in his tone made my stomach tighten. "What do you mean?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he opened a drawer and pulled out a thick sealed envelope. Daniel's handwriting was on the front. My name again. Eleanor Brooks. Personal delivery only. My hand started shaking. "He gave you this?" I asked. "6 months ago," Harold replied. "He told me something might happen, and if it did, I was to give you this exactly 1 day after his funeral." My throat went dry. 1 day after? Yes. My fingers hovered over the seal. "Open it," Harold said gently. I broke it carefully. Inside was a letter and a bank card. But the letter came first. I unfolded it. Daniel's handwriting filled the page. "My dearest Ellie, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and I left the bank with the folders pressed tightly against my chest, as if holding them closer could somehow make the truth less dangerous. It didn't. Outside, the city looked unchanged. Cars moved. People laughed. A vendor sold coffee on the corner like nothing in the world had shifted. But everything had shifted for me. Daniel hadn't just left me money. He had left me a secret war. By the time I reached home, the sky was turning gray again. Vanessa's car was parked outside. My stomach tightened instantly. Ryan was inside the house. I could feel it before I even opened the door. Voices drifted from the study. Not arguing. Deciding. I stepped inside quietly and followed the sound. Through the half-open door, I saw them standing around Daniel's desk. Ryan was holding a document I recognized immediately, the estate summary. Vanessa was scrolling through her phone, impatient. "They're delaying again," she said. "Her lawyer is stalling." Ryan's jaw clenched. "She's trying to get advice. That's all." "She doesn't need advice," Vanessa snapped. "She needs pressure." I froze behind the doorframe. Pressure. So that was what I had become to them. Not a stepmother. Not family. An obstacle. Ryan lowered his voice. "Once she signs away her claim, everything becomes uncontested. We liquidate the assets, settle the debts, and move everything into the offshore structure." My heart stopped. Offshore structure. So Daniel had been right. There was something rotten underneath this entire inheritance battle. Vanessa leaned against the desk. "And the house? We sell it immediately. Market value is high right now." A pause. Then Ryan added something colder. "And her insurance payout. Make sure she waives any future dispute rights." They were not just taking assets. They were erasing me. I stepped back slowly, careful not to make a sound. My pulse was thunder in my ears. I backed into the hallway and closed my eyes. Daniel's warning echoed in my ear. I didn't sleep the night before the final signing. Not because I was afraid of losing everything, but because I finally understood what everything meant. At 9 a.m. my lawyer called. "It's today," he said. "If you're going to change your mind, this is the last moment." "I'm not changing my mind," I replied. My voice surprised even me. It was calm. Too calm. By 11:30 a.m., I was sitting in the downtown probate office. The same building where families came to divide love into paperwork. Ryan and Vanessa were already there. They looked confident. Almost relieved. Like a storm they had been waiting for was finally clearing. Ryan leaned toward Vanessa. "She's going to sign," he whispered. Vanessa smiled slightly. "Of course she is." I said nothing. I just placed my handbag carefully on the table. Inside it was Daniel's black folder. Closed. Waiting. The attorney began reading the final agreement. Words like transfer, waive, irrevocable filled the room. Each one felt like a door closing behind me. Ryan tapped his pen impatiently. Vanessa didn't even pretend to hide her excitement. "We appreciate how cooperative you've been," she said sweetly. Cooperative. That word almost made me laugh. Because they still believed this was surrender, not preparation. "Mrs. Brooks," the attorney said finally, sliding the last document forward. "If you sign here, all claims to the estate will be fully transferred to Mr. Ryan and Ms. Vanessa Brooks." A pen was placed in front of me. Silence fell. This was the moment. The moment Daniel had warned me about. Picked up the pen. Ryan leaned forward slightly. Vanessa held her breath. And I signed. One smooth motion. No hesitation. The ink spread across the page like a final decision. For a second, nothing happened. Then Ryan smiled. "Finally." "It's done," he said. Vanessa exhaled in relief. "I told you she would." The attorney raised a ha. 3 days later, I still hadn't answered most of the calls. The house was quieter now, but not the same kind of quiet I had felt after the funeral. That silence had been empty. This one felt reset. Like the world had been forced to start over without asking permission. Ryan and Vanessa were gone. Not just from the house. From everything. Their lawyers had tried twice to challenge the ruling, but every attempt collapsed under the same thing. Daniel hadn't left loopholes. He had left locks. And every lock had already been turned. That morning, I stood in Daniel's study again. The desk was exactly as he left it in memory, but I no longer saw absence there. I saw intention. Every file, every book, every quiet habit of his life had been part of something I was only now beginning to understand. I opened the bottom drawer. The wooden box was still there. Inside it, one final envelope I hadn't opened yet. My name written again. But this one was different. The handwriting was slower, heavier. Like he had known this would be the last thing I ever read from him. I opened it. "Ellie, if you are reading this, then everything has settled exactly as it should. I didn't protect you because I expected war. I protected you because I knew who would start it." Ryan and Vanessa were never interested in legacy. Only extraction. And people like that don't stop. They escalate until something breaks them. I paused. My fingers tightened slightly on the paper. So I built something that breaks first. A cold breath moved through me. I kept reading. What they lost was not punishment. It was consequence. And what you gained was not reward. It was stability. My eyes blurred slightly, but I didn't stop. You will be told I was clever, strategic, even ruthless. But I was simply careful. Because I loved you longer than I feared them. I lowered the letter slowly. The room didn't feel empty anymore. It felt full of him. Not his. Part 6. The truth they never saw coming. 1 month later, I stopped answering calls from strangers pretending to be lawyers. There were many of them at first. Some polite, some aggressive, some trying to convince me that Daniel's structure could be reversed, challenged, or negotiated. But they all stopped when they realized the same thing. Nothing about it could be undone. Daniel hadn't built a fragile plan. He had built a closed system. The foundation office became part of my routine. First, I went only to sign papers. Then I started asking questions. Then I started making decisions. And slowly, I began to understand what Daniel had actually created. It wasn't just money. It was architecture. A network of protections designed to outlast grief, greed, and time itself. Every program we activated had one purpose: to catch people right before they fell into the same trap I had survived. One afternoon, the foundation director placed a new file in front of me. "This came from legal review," she said carefully. I opened it. Inside were updates from Ryan and Vanessa's side. Not directly, but through consequences. Financial restrictions, frozen accounts, failed appeals, mounting legal costs they could no longer transfer or hide. They were not in prison, not in public ruin, but something quieter, something heavier. They were contained by their own choices. I closed the file. I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't feel revenge. I felt distance, like their story had already moved out of my reach. Later that evening, I returned to Daniel's study. The house no longer felt like it was waiting for me to leave. It felt like it had finally accepted I was staying. I sat by the window where he used to read. And for the first time since his death, I spoke out loud. "You knew this would happen," I said softly. No answer, of course, but I didn't need one anymore. Because now I understood how he thought. He didn't bill. Part 7. What he built in my name. 6 months passed before I realized I had stopped waking up in fear. Not because everything was perfect, but because nothing could suddenly collapse anymore. Daniel's design had settled into reality like a foundation poured too deep to crack. And I was no longer reacting to life. I was shaping it. The first time I visited one of the funded programs in person, it was a small legal aid center on the edge of the city. Nothing impressive from the outside. Simple building, faded sign, quiet hallway. But inside, I saw women sitting across from lawyers who weren't asking for money first. They were asking for truth. I stood in the doorway for a long moment. One of the staff members noticed me. "You're Mrs. Brooks, aren't you?" I nodded slowly. She smiled. "We've been expecting you." That sentence stayed with me. Not because it was dramatic, but because it felt like Daniel was still organizing things behind the scenes. Still making sure I was never walking into a room alone. Later that day, I signed the approval for a new outreach program. Emergency financial protection for spouses in contested estates. It wasn't loud work. It wasn't glamorous. But it was necessary. And every signature felt like completing something Daniel had already started. That evening, I returned home and found a letter waiting on the desk. No envelope this time. Just folded paper. Daniel's handwriting again. Slightly faded. As if it had been waiting longer than it should have. "Ellie, if you are reading this far, then you have stopped asking what I did. And started understanding why I did it." I sat down slowly. The room was quiet. Not empty. Quiet. There is a difference. People think wealth is what you leave behind. But it is not. Wealth is what continues to move when you are no longer there to control it. I looked out the window. The same trees we PLA. Final part. The legacy that outlived him. A year later, I stopped introducing myself as Daniel Brooks' widow. Not because I wanted to forget him, but because I finally understood that my life was no longer defined by what I had lost. It was defined by what I had become after losing it. The foundation had grown beyond anything I ever imagined. What started as a single legal protection program was now operating across multiple cities. We helped people before they collapsed under systems they didn't understand. We gave them time. We gave them clarity. Sometimes we gave them a way out. And every so often I would catch myself thinking the same thing. Daniel would have hated the spotlight. He never built things to be seen, only to function. One afternoon, I returned to the house for the final time. It was being prepared for transition. New ownership, new life, new memories that would slowly replace ours. But I wasn't there to stop it. I was there to say goodbye properly. I walked through each room slowly. The kitchen, the hallway, the study. Each space felt like a chapter that had already finished writing itself. In Daniel's study, I placed a small wooden box on the desk. Inside were all his final letters. Unsealed now. Complete. No longer secrets. Just history. I ran my fingers over the lid for a moment, then whispered softly, "You did more than protect me. You rebuilt me." As I turned to leave, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. A small engraved plaque fixed inside the bottom drawer of his desk. It read, "Nothing important is ever left unprotected." I smiled faintly. Of course he would leave one last line I had somehow missed. Outside, the air felt lighter than I remembered. The kind of quiet that no longer carries grief inside it. Only time. Only continuation. That evening, I stood in front of the Foundation's main office as the sun set behind the city. Lights began to turn on. I